wherever there is a dry vegetation, so there are chances that it can catch fire naturally too, as well as due to the human induced factors. And as per the report of Forest Survey of India, 95% of the cases where the forest fire has occurred, it is due to human induced factors.
So overall, if we look at the whole, all aspect of the environment, so all the components of the environment, air, water, plants, animals, all other types of microorganisms, they are destroyed, they are disturbed. The quality as such also of whatever is left, that is also in a very bad state.
When you talk of forest fire, it requires at least 16% of oxygen in the atmosphere, right? That oxygen, the forest fire itself drives. This is what is mentioned. Large forest fires, they live to make themselves live. So they will go on attracting more and more oxygen by changing the whole climate of the region, by creating their own winds.
So any program will only work if you have some models where people are involved. So for that, as starters, we need to create that kind of awareness. People should be aware, the forest dwellers, the tribal communities.
Something I should say alarming, because peatlands we have seen, but when you talk of a wetland of that size and that too being destroyed, it is obviously an alarming sign. So to that comes the concern of what are the triggers which are there. I believe that's where we have to focus.
Okay, that is a social issue, the increased man-animal conflict due to the forest fire. So the impacts of forest fire, I can say it's multidimensional. It's not just related to environmental or ecological or social. It is everything.
Hello and welcome to The Perspective, where we delve into important happenings around the world and in India. Today we will discuss about forest fire, something which may appear to you as random, but it's actually not. What are the impacts of these forest fire, why they are happening, and what can be done? We will discuss all this with our esteemed panelists of faculty members, Harsh Sir, Rajesh Sir, and Jasmine Ma'am. Welcome you all. So Harsh Sir, before we start, so can you tell our viewers what is the current or the ongoing patterns of these forest fire around the world and specifically in India?
So a very decently put question, I should say, and there are two ways we have to look at it. The first is the natural part of the forest fire, because naturally forest fires are a part of our ecosystem, the way they happen, right? So there's a natural part to it, and it is happening for millions of years. And in the process, they have a role of helping the forest ecology to develop by clearing the ground and making the nutrient cycle more efficient and other part. But when we see in the last few decades, especially I would say starting from the last century, so we did see in the beginning of the last century also we see some very big fires in Australia and US and Russia. Especially this century also, if we see the last 2 decades, there was a very big fire that we had in 2003, that was the Siberian fire, and then in Australia recently. And last year, 2024, if we see, we had a very big fire in the region that we call as the Paternal region, which is, though it's not the forest part, but it was a wetland. And it was the largest wetland that we had in the Amazon basin, and that was destroyed due to the forest fire. Now, that is something I should say alarming, because peatlands we have seen, but when you talk of a wetland of that size and that too being destroyed, it is obviously an alarming sign. So to that comes the concern of what are the triggers which are there. I believe that's where we have to focus. So in that, what we find is that the triggers to some extent are because of the climatic factors, right? And how the climate change is playing its role. And in addition to that, the anthropogenic causes that we have. So both of them put together are a major driver that we have, right? For example, when we see the World Research Institute's data, in the last 2 decades, the amount of land being affected by forest fires has doubled on an annual basis, which is an addition of around 6 million hectares of land annually. That's a big number when you're talking, and that too if it has doubled. So then we have to look into the factors which are the cause for this.
And ma'am, if we talk about India, so where and when we can see these forest fire getting frequent and becoming an issue?
So we can start talking about when India, as such, being a tropical, subtropical country, we have high temperatures, which kind of become suitable for these fires to spread. So if we have to draw the timeline, it is going to be the pre-monsoon season, before it starts raining, when we have very dry conditions. So we can say March to June. That is the time when India and different forests across India, they are highly prone to these forest fires. We can take the example of Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand is one of the most prone areas when it comes to forest fires, and that is because of the pine wood trees mainly. If we look at the pine tree, the pine needles which are there, they are very, very highly flammable. So if if a forest catches fire there, then it is bound to grow. Then we can also look at some other kinds of areas, like maybe in central India, we have like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, these regions, they have a lot of salwood trees. These are also again in those dry season very prone to fires. Along with that, we can think of smaller forests in northeastern regions or even in some parts of Western Ghats, where we find that yes, they are prone to coming under these forest fires. And of course, like Sir has pointed out, some of that is because of course, the climatic factors, like I said, dry conditions before the rain, and of course, human activity is going to or is now in a position where it is creating a scenario where we are more vulnerable to this, and we find these would happen, or the incidents of these forest fire are happening more across India because of those factors.
So Rajesh Sir, as ma'am has pointed out, like human activity and human factor, it is a big factor when we talk about forest fire. So what is this factor and how it is contributing to this forest fire that we see around the world and India?
See, whether it is natural or anthropogenic cause of forest fire, the prerequisite for forest fire is the presence of a dry vegetation. And wherever there is a dry vegetation, so there are chances that it can catch fire naturally too, as well as due to the human induced factors. And as per the report of Forest Survey of India, 95% of the cases where the forest fire has occurred, it is due to human induced factors. So if I had to talk about the natural factors, it can be due to lightning, which can trigger a immediate fire, or even due to the rolling of stones due to the rockfall, rock slide, which can trigger the sparks, or even the swaying of bamboo. Okay, so so the dry wood is tend to catch fire. So other than this, as Sir was pointing out, it's part of the natural so regeneration of any ecosystem. But in the last few decades, the number of incidents of forest fire have increased. It's mainly because of anthropogenic factors. And we can classify them into two different categories. One is intentional, another is unintentional. So unintentionally, what causes forest fire? Mainly due to negligence. Okay, so the negligence of the tourists and the travelers who are passing through the forest where there is dry vegetation. Okay, so or the particularly these in the recent times, if at all you have heard the incidents of campfire. The tourists go inside the forest and they stay overnight and they do this campfire, and they forget to put it off, or unintentionally it just spreads out. Okay, so that is another. And the tribal communities who live inside the forest, unintentionally their so the fire in their household, it spreads out. Okay, so or unintentionally, another interesting cause of forest fire, particularly in Himalayas, is the change in the nature of the natural vegetation. Okay, so in Himalayas, we observe two types of vegetation. One is the Devdar as well as Chirpine. Okay, so what happened during the British time, so which we can also call it as a kind of blunder of British administration. So they gave preference to the Chirpine wood rather than the Devdar, naturally growing Devdar. So because Devdar is slow, of course Devdar is well demanded, but it grows slowly, and Chirpine grows faster. So they replaced most of the vegetation with Chirpine, that to monoculture. Okay, so and Chirpine can grow in any kind of dry conditions also, degraded land also. So most of the Himalayas are now covered with Chirpine trees, and there is very less other type of vegetation, particularly mixed vegetation, which would have suppressed the forest fire. And as ma'am was pointing out, so the leaves of the Chirpines, basically a coniferous tree. So the needle-like leaves, when it becomes dry, it falls on the ground and it covers the entire ground and makes it more prone to the fire. Immediately, any kind of incidents can immediately trigger the fire. Okay, so these are like unintentional causes. And intentionally, why would someone start a fire inside the forest? So many reasons are there. One is slash and burn agriculture, shifting cultivation, which is practiced in some parts of Northeast India also. And even the practice of primitive agriculture involving stubble burning. Okay, so and also regeneration burning is another practice. Okay, so many areas for grazing purpose, they want to have the vegetation to regrow faster. They just start the fire and it burns like uncontrollable manner. And in addition to this, also, so one way of so land grabbing in the surrounding areas of forest to start a forest fire. The people who are living in the surrounding villages, they just start the fire with the intention of clearing the land and converting into agriculture land. Okay, so and also the poachers and hunters. So it's very easy to catch the wild animals during the forest fire. Okay, so and with that intentional, they start the forest fire. Of course, all of it is illegal, but it still happens.
So, sir, as sir pointed out, like it is mainly driven by the anthropogenic causes, but there are also climate drivers for forest fire. So, can you tell our viewers what are these climate drivers, or how climate change is impacting these forest fires?
So on this, I would recall two documents from which I would like to quote, not keeping it just as a general discussion. The first one is the NIDM's 2014 document on forest fires, where they talk of the relation between fire, fuel, and the heat, right? So they say there is a triangle. I would probably quote in that sense, and when the heat in the region is generally higher because of climate change or whatever, the fire gets triggered and it becomes a loop. Okay, so this is a triangular loop where you have the heat and the fire and the this part, and all the three make it as one cyclic process. Similarly, the World Research Institute in one of its document calls this loop as the fire climate loop. Okay, in which they say that because of global warming, the dryness in general is increasing. Because of this dryness which is increasing, the regions which are becoming drier are becoming bigger, because of which we have mega fires now in many of the regions. Because of these mega fires, there is a lot of carbon which is put back, which was sequestered into the nature, and because it goes back into the system, it behaves like a global warming gas, right? What you call it, the GHGs. And from the GHGs, the climate cycle or the global warming cycle again enhances. So it again becomes a loop. So we can imagine this like these two kind of loops which are working, and this is where the climate goes on to trigger the fire or makes the region drier. The dryness makes the fire bigger. The fire releases more carbon, and the carbon makes the climate change more worse. This is one part of the thing that I would like to bring the notice to. The second is because when we say global warming leads to climate change. When we say climate change, we are talking of lot of extreme conditions in terms of climate. One of them major is drought. One. Second is the cycle which is getting distorted. For example, when you see last year and this year, we have been observing that the summers or the heat waves have started from somewhere around March, which means you have a much prolonged hotter season. The droughts are becoming longer, and because of that, the fires are becoming more and more frequent, because drought is one of the major causes in when you talk of the forest fires. So that is anthropogenic to some extent, but yes, climate change, anthropogenic and all. This is how the loop goes. I would also like to bring one more thing to notice, how the anthropogenic and the climate thing, when, for example, when you're talking of the chair pine. Okay, when you see Indian forests, the chair pine has around 3.5% of all of our forest covers in the country. And as Sir has rightly pointed out, it was during the British period. Why did they do it? For the railway construction and all. But chair pine has an ecological adaptation. What it does is that it drops its leaves. So it's an ecological adaptation of the tree. What it does, it drops the leaves, and those leaves catch fire. This is how it clears competition and it grows. Right? So that's an adaptation of the tree, right? In ecology. It's not doing it, or it's not happening just like that. It's not happening with any other conifer trees. It is happening with this. And chair pine has also evolved to an extent that its branches and its parts can withstand fire. Right? So it just goes on growing itself, and in the process, the fire also becomes more and more. So this is how climate change is affecting, anthropogenic causes are also affecting, and this whole cycle is becoming worst. And we won't even know as of now that what other factors climate change would do, because climate change is so unpredictable. We are still not able to predict it, even with the best assessment reports of the 5th assessment report or the 6th assessment report or whatever. You find that every year it becomes more unpredictable. So these fires are going to be more unpredictable with this. So this is a vicious cycle that we have fallen in.
If I may, I would like to add one more thing. The phenomena which we observed in the recent Los Angeles fire. So it is said that there was a incident of hydroclimatic whiplash. So that is an intense dry season after an intense wet season. So during the intense wet season, the vegetation grows well, and after that followed by an intense dry and drought conditions makes the vegetation totally dry and prone to forest fire. And the extreme events caused by the climate change, so the continuous drought and heat wave. So that, in addition to that, the Santa Ana winds, the local winds, hot winds. So all of these factors, like together, it triggers such a wildfire, a phenomena which we have not witnessed in the recent times at all. Okay, so the scale of Los Angeles fire or even the South Korean fire was like unimaginable. South Korea is comparatively very low temperature region, calm conditions, and there we are witnessing these kind of. Okay, so that is totally because of, I can say, climate change.
And one more thing that Sir's, because as Sir pointed out, one more thing that comes to my mind is that when you see about mega forest fires, they tend to create their own microclimate. Right, so they would create their own whirlpools of winds, and they have, because when you talk of forest fire, it requires at least 16% of oxygen in the atmosphere, right? That oxygen, the forest fire itself drives. This is what is mentioned. Large forest fires, they live to make themselves live. So they will go on attracting more and more oxygen by changing the whole climate of the region, by creating their own winds, and they attracting more of the oxygen. So it's like, that's why we say it's a vicious cycle.
So, like what we have seen is that these anthropogenic causes, they have increased, and as Sir pointed out, this is become now a part of a positive feedback loop where climate change is driving these forest fire, and forest fire are aiding in climate change, right? Then it does not remain random. Now these forest fire are more frequent, they are more intense. That all leads to higher cost. So let's talk about the cost of these forest fire. Ma'am, can you point out what is the ecological cost of these forest fire?
Kapil, I think we've talked about a lot of aspects of the environment already. So we can just pinpoint to each of these that what will be happening, starting with air. So in air, the biggest problem is the gases which are being emitted. We particularly talk about carbon emission here. Along with that, because it is a fire, there's going to be a lot of particulate matter also. And the challenge is, it's not limited to just that forested area. There is wind, the air is going to travel, it is going to go to all adjacent areas where habitation is there. So that kind of really increases the scale of damage, increases the cost of this damage. Similarly, water pollution we can talk about. The pollutants which are being released from the forest, they're going into the river stream also, the water body, will go into the groundwater also. And these polluting elements, of course, degrade the quality of water. Along with that, it also disturbs the natural cycle of the water cycle which is there. Because now, after the fire, there's a lot of heat, there's going to be a lot of drying. So rainfall patterns can also get disturbed because of that. Then we come to the biotic factors, the living organisms. Of course, there's a fire, so plants are dead, plants are destroyed in that. So first of all, we would have concerns about the forest as a whole, because it was a dense area. It will take a lot of time to regenerate that. It will take, the time period will be in years. And if there's any area where there was a species which was already very limited in number, like let's say there was an endangered species growing in that area, so that means that has gone extinct just in a matter of probably a few days or a few hours. When it comes to animals, a lot of animals are able to flee that area. They are able to move away from there when they see a fire coming, so they become displaced. So if they are dead, that's again that same problem of extinction of organisms and losing the biodiversity in that region. But if they displace, then it leads to a whole series of problems, because they might be running off to the non-forested areas, maybe the urban areas, and there you get this whole series of new problems of the human-animal conflict also, which is there. So overall, if we look at the all aspect of the environment, so all the components of the environment, air, water, plants, animals, all other types of microorganisms, they are destroyed, they are disturbed, and the quality as such also of whatever is left, that is also in a very bad state.
Yep. So particularly when we talk about after forest fire, the plants which comes back here are usually invasive in nature.
Yeah.
So which survives these kind of dry conditions, and all these endemic species would get lost.
So I would like to add here that even if it's regenerated, if the cycle is not completed the way it was supposed to be, it's like breaking of an egg, right? When you break the egg from outside, life is gone. When you break the egg from inside, or when the egg breaks from inside, life starts. So regeneration by forest fires is a natural process, but if it is done anthropogenically, if we do it so frequent, the ecosystem never recovers back to the level that it was at the first place.
And like one notion that people might have is that forest fire have to do something but with forests only, but that is not the case, as we saw in Los Angeles. So there is this social and economical cost also to these forest fires, right? So sir, can you point out what these costs are?
So talking about the economical costs of forest fire. So first of all, there is a loss of timber, valuable timber, which is a very important raw material for various different industries, and it takes a lot of time for it to grow back. Okay, so there is a loss of timber, and there's a large amount of so non-timber forest produce. We also call it as minor forest produce. Okay, so for example, one of the main loss of forest fire in central India is the loss of this mahua flowers. Okay, mahua flowers are one of the main important minor forest produce, which the local tribal communities and rural communities, they collect it and use it for making various different products. And all of such kind of non-timber forest produce are lost, whether it is resin or honey or seeds or flowers, all of these are lost. In addition to this, there is a loss of tourism activities would get impacted, and there is a cost of reconstruction and rehabilitation, extra added cost, and yeah, these are the main economical losses. Talking about the social losses, yes, there is a loss of life. People die during the forest fire, and the people who are involved in the forest fire suppression, their life get impacted. Okay, they get injured. There are various health issues associated. Okay, so various respiratory diseases due to the emission of particulate matter. And in addition to this, the migration of people, the tribal communities had to be displaced, and the surrounding rural areas may have to be displaced, and in many areas the agriculture fields would get impacted. In addition to this, there is also a cultural aspect. So many parts of the forests, they preserve this traditional culture. For example, many of the sacred groves in India. Okay, so and if they are lost, the traditions which are preserved for like thousands of years will be lost. And for example, even the recent South Korean forest fire, a Buddhist monastery which was there for nearly 1300 years, that was burnt down. Okay, so all of these are not going to come back. Okay, so we may bring back through the infrastructure loss, but the cultural loss will not be able to bear. And in addition to this, what ma'am has added, the man-animal conflict. Okay, that is a social issue, the increased man-animal conflict due to the forest fire. Okay, so the impacts of forest fire, I can say it's multidimensional. It's not just related to environmental or ecological or social. It is everything.
What this brings to my mind also is from a bit of the background. In India, we had a Binsar sanctuary fire a few years back, and in that fire, if I'm rightly recalling, around 8 of the forest people, the people who were working towards reducing that forest fire, they got trapped, and all of them died. These were government officers from the forest department who got, so as Sir was rightly pointing, that it's like loss of life. And they didn't know how to behave because the direction of wind changed, and they got trapped and they died. So this is in terms of loss of life. And when you talk of loss of value, economic value, in each of these fires which have happened in Korea or in California, billions of dollars of worth of economic value was lost, right? And so this is how impacting this could be.
And as this impact increases, as this cost increases, and these fires become frequent and more destructive, we need to have good interventions. So now let's come to that intervention part. So Harsha, what are these policies we have, or what are we doing right now in India to address these forest fires?
Okay, so when we say forest fires, though initially it was not handled in the disaster management. We have a disaster management system in India, and it's a proactive system that we have now, NDMA, as we write. And when you look at NDMA did come up with guidelines with respect to forest fires because of the frequency of the forest fires that we have. And NIDM has also come up with a forest fire document where it says the plan for forest fire. As I said, it was 2014 when it was released. And then we have some more documents around forest fire. Then we have a national action plan on forest fire, right? And other initiatives that we are taking. We are also doing some technology interventions where we are using satellite imagery. So initially we had a modest system which had an accuracy of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer block. So it was scanning the whole thing in terms of this data. But now we have a newer system which has an accuracy of around 375 into 375 meter accuracy in terms of identifying forest fire regions. So these are the satellite images that we are using in terms of technology. So on one side we have measures which are in terms of programs that we are doing. The other is in terms of technology interventions that we are doing. And then we are also doing some intervention in the field. For example, when you see central Indian forest fires, different regions in India, they have different causes of forest fires. So when you see central Indian region, one of the major causes of forest fire is the collection of, as Sir rightly pointed out, mahua leaves and the tendu leaves which we use in beedi making, right? So there are interventions done to hold the tribals for collecting these leaves in the seasons where forest fires are more frequent or man-induced causes are more frequent. One more thing that comes to my mind is that when you read the document from NIDM about forest fire, it mentions as one of the intentional cause of forest fire as taking as a retaliatory action against the forest department. It mentions it, that it is in retaliation to the forest action that people put forest fire and take revenge. I think the word used is revenge, if I'm rightly recalling. So obviously forest department is doing, they are using different methods, and in other countries also they are taking technology interventions. Nowadays you have these newer apps which have come up. For example, if I'm rightly recalling, Lockheed Martin has developed an app which is they call it as the twin system or something. So that system they are using for identifying hazardous condition in industrial areas. Now, same app is being used gradually in different by some countries at an experimental level in forests to figure out hazardous conditions, and from that they are trying to control. Now, those kind of things we can also develop. Even we have some apps that we are using in India, for example, with respect to forest fire. In Arunachal we are using, and Uttarakhand we are using. So, some of the measures that we have as of now are in this domain.
Ma'am, as Sir has pointed out, like there's some technological interventions that are there, right? And there is a gap in which we can learn from other countries, right? So what are the other things that we can learn, or what are these gaps which we need to fill, and how we need to do that?
I think in this part, one thing, along with, of course, all the government programs and the technology interventions, which can play a very significant role, is community participation. Because if you want to increase vigilance, if you want to increase surveillance, and if you want to have an earlier idea of a forest fire starting somewhere or an early management on ground you want, that has to come from community participation. So any program will only work if you have some models where people are involved. So for that, as starters, we need to create that kind of awareness. People should be aware, the forest dwellers, the tribal communities, they are traditionally equipped to understand a lot of this, but now we need to mainstream that whole thing along with our technology integration, that okay, the people who are living there, they should know that what happens when they do a certain kind of activity, how do they stop it, or if there's something which is going is increasing in dimension, or there's a fire which has been started, how do they go and approach the reporting channels? I think this is one very big gap, that we are not able to get timely help. And like we've been talking so much about how you have these dry pine leaves or dry vegetation, they will in a matter of hours spread to a very wide area. So if we can stop it at an early stage, that will really contain the problem in the very beginning. So for that, early warning systems, which means again, like Nepal has done a great deal with this setting up community participation, because that has been a model which will definitely work, because the forest department, or like Sir has been talking about, the disaster management system, that alone cannot do it. We need to incorporate many more aspects. So that would be, first of all, of course, we can also talk about this in the preventive sense also. First of all, they should know that, okay, what not to do to start the fire. And like we've talked so much about those pine needles. So government is talking about buying them from these forest developers as a minor forest produce, and increasing the cost so that more people are incentivized to clear those dry things. So that is another thing which could be done. And this has to become like a standard system, that we should know that, okay, this is the role of the disaster management system, this is the role of the forest department, and this is the role of the forest dwellers, or you can talk about village panchayats or whatever organization is there. It will only work best in terms of both prevention and management if we have kind of an integrated approach.
So in addition to what ma'am has said, so I'd like to add, so there are a few, traditional practices also which we have forgotten, so which we should bring it back. So one of the important reason behind the increase in the forest fire in Himalayas is the removal of all this community participation in the forest management after the British administration started and they took over the forests. So earlier the community participation has been one of the very strong preventive measure which used to stop the forest fire at its root cause only. Okay, so in the same example what ma'am was saying, Nepal, there is community forest user groups which manages nearly 40% of forests of Nepal, and that has been very much helpful in reduction of the forest fire to a very great extent. And in fact, even in Indonesia also there are few programs like incentivizing those villages where zero forest fires have been reported. Okay, so giving them some extra rewards. Okay, these kind of community participation also even in India also. So we have this joint forest management practices which has been over a period of time has declined. So I think we should revive those practices. In addition, I think we need to bring also some preventive measures like establishment of forest fire lines, and also the controlled burning on time to reduce the incidence of forest fires. And these are the methods usually followed by the forest department to do it. So, but we have to make the people more aware and the community more aware about these such kind of measures so that we can prevent the forest fire on time.
So you had earlier mentioned about monoculture also.
Yes.
I think that's also something which could change. Like there are some trees which are fire resistant.
Yes.
Right, some which are more prone, so we can maybe have a mix of them.
Yes.
Right, so that it doesn't spread that much whenever.
And also the reason why the chirpine catches fire so easily, the one is the dry needles, and also it is resin rich. The resin rich, it catches fire and it comes back quickly. Yeah. So there is a very much necessary of bringing this diversity rather than going for monoculture.
So like in the end, we can say policy is important, technology is important, but community integration, that is the most important part when we talk about forest fire. Thank you so much panelists for this detailed discussion upon forest fire. So aspirants, I hope now you have a very good idea why we are seeing this rise in forest fire, what Indian government is doing, and what more need to be done in terms of policy, technology, and community integration. If you like this video, do share, like, and subscribe to our channel. We will keep bringing such informative videos to you. Thank you.